Okay, so this is the third and final video of a set of videos on Gregory Bateson and his work on play and fantasy and the role of the word not. And what I want to do is to conclude this discussion by bringing up his appeal to the distinction between analog and digital communication. Now, before I do that, I just want to maybe recap for just a moment, right? Bateson's at the Flesh Hacker Zoo. He sees a monkey nipping at another monkey, and this sort of play activity within monkey behavior for him becomes a sign that monkeys are able to frame some of their behavior, and he sees the beginning of what he later will identify as the onion skin fabric of language, which is that it has nested sets within sets, and that because the word not can be used at multiple levels of abstraction, and without us really paying close attention to that, we end up committing what he came to call paradoxes of abstraction, where we either contradict ourselves or we have a class being a member of itself. Now, okay, before we go on to all of that and get to the analog and digital, first, really quickly, if somebody's still not sure, a quick way to understand what is meant by the violation of the theory of logical types. One of the classic cases that's given is there is a certain world that has one and only one barber. Now, this barber shaves all and only those who don't shave themselves. How does the barber get a shave? Well, the barber's somehow caught either having to shave himself or he can't shave himself, and it's because somehow the barber is being treated as a member of the class, although the barber is sort of defining the class by doing the all and only. At any rate, if you think about that case, I hope you can see the sort of paradox there. Bateson isn't disagreeing with the need for logical typing attention and the importance of trying to avoid logical typing paradoxes. What he is suggesting, though, is that had evolutionary development and the development of human cognition simply obeyed the theory of logical types, language would have never emerged. In fact, what you start to see in behavioral play elements in mammals is a kind of development of the necessary pre-requirements for language. Language is a kind of extensive development of play. Now, in order to clarify one more time of how Bateson came to this, and to wrap this up, we need, as I suggested, to make a distinction between analog and digital communication. Analog and digital communication is a much preferred expression to nonverbal and verbal. Too many people just use the word nonverbal and verbal, although there is much similarity, and I can see why people would sort of align those this way. Bateson himself was not at all happy with that, and even the richer understandings of analog and digital communication that was explicated by Václavic, Bavin, and Jackson. It's a good work. I think people who are familiar with the pragmatics of human communication will know that as a classic. Bateson himself wasn't all that happy with it, though. He was a little bit unhappy with its oversimplifications, and he preferred Anthony Wilden's system and structure. And so a little chart here that I'll hold up here for just a second, and please, if you want to copy some of these down, you can do that, and then freeze it, and we'll try to talk about it. Now, when I talk about the analog, I simply mean analogic communication is all behavior, it's action, it's even the vocal qualities of speech, but it's all of those aspects of our world that are continuous, contiguous relations. Now, notice here at the level of analog, there's no not. There's no, I mean, here I look at this, right? The level of analog, notice, there's just continuity here between and among whatever is there. There is no not there. And you notice here, one of the other major elements here is that there are no logical types or sets. There's differences of more or less, right? The image is either more or less in the image. Everything is continuous and contiguous in all directions. And at the level of nonverbal, notice that there are no logical types or sets within sets. It has a clear semantics, but no syntax. Now, we look at what I'm holding. I'm not sure, is it a thing? Is it an object? Is it a cup? Is it an artifact? Is it a gift from a friend? Now, when I talk, I introduce categories and classes that somehow put it sets within sets. But at the level of the analog, just there are none of those distinctions. Now, if we go to the digital, notice the digital here. This is where we actually have the words nip and bite. Bateson wasn't talking about the words nip and bite. He was talking about the evolutionary developments that made possible for nip and bite and those sort of framing capacities within discourse. With speech, with the digital, or what could be better said, digital communication, you have discrete symbols that have, not only do they have separations or gaps, but they have syntactical qualities, in particular the syntactical not. Now, when I say the syntactical not, I mean you can say what something is not. I can say what this is not. I can say this is not an eggplant. Now, in the analog, there's withdrawal or refusal, but there is no way to say what something isn't at the simple level of the analog or the nonverbal level. Notice here that in the digital there is a kind of powerful syntax, but it's ambiguous. If I say the word cup or mug, you don't really know what I mean, but when I show you, you can see it very clearly, right? There is a difference. Now, one last example that I'll try to do to help clarify this. This is an attempt at analogic pagination. Now, what I did here was I took a manuscript and I removed all the page numbers, and in place of the page numbers, I notched and branded it diagonally across the top. Now, if you were walking with this stack of papers at the analog level, and you dropped the stack, you could put all of the pages back into their intended order, and you could keep their continuous and contiguous relations in the arrangement that it was originally put in. But think of how you wouldn't be able to talk about any of the pages independently. You couldn't refer to any of the pages. You couldn't say, hey, turn to page 15. You couldn't say, I found an error on page 30. You couldn't say, everyone in the class now turn to this page. You wouldn't have digital distinctions. What you'd have is analog differences. Analog differences are what we're talking about here in this kind of pagination. It would be mostly useless, though, for what we think of when we're thinking about digital communication. When we try to think about digital communication, we have to think about classes within classes so that I can refer to a page in isolation. When Bateson was talking about digital communication, human language, the fact that we're able to say what things are and what things are not, he was trying to suggest that there is a kind of paradoxical, playful element in the evolutionary precursor to language. It's that framing capacity where organisms are able to introduce some form, right? There's some, wait, where is it? On the digital side here? Oh, I guess I'm on the other side here. It's on this side over here, right? Some sort of is not. The syntactical not is, the animal isn't saying this nip isn't a bite, right? But it's sort of saying this nip means the bite but doesn't mean what the bite would mean. There is this rudimentary sense of negation, but until that sense of negation can develop itself, you wouldn't have all the playful aspects of language and the full capacity that we do have in our ability to talk about talk. Certainly, it was Russell and Whitehead's admonishment to not confuse a class with its name, or to not confuse a type for a member of that set, or a set with a member of the set. But I think that said, they were giving that admonishment to people only because we do have a rich capacity to confuse ourselves. I mean, if I say to you, here's a mug, and then somebody else says, oh no, that's not a mug. Mug's a word that comes out of your mouth. It seems so odd. It's sort of like the Negrete, this is not a pipe. We have to be reminded that we do identify, and we do in some way confuse ourselves with logical types, but that's what language makes possible. Do we want to be careful about making those mistakes? Yes. That's not the point, though. The point is that evolutionary development would have been at a standstill if we would have just obeyed that rule. Human language is a kind of playful paradox that allows us to frame within frame talk about things and actually try to take ourselves seriously when we try to speak the truth. Okay, thanks.